It's amazing that you see our students right now on college campus cheering on Hamas.
These are not organic student protests.
They're 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're out there on campus leading the chants, and they're giving direction to these students.
Death to America!
It's a privilege to come to this country. If you're supporting terror groups, you should be deported. And if you don't like it here, then leave.
You cannot unknow what you have learned here tonight. Tonight, you might think you understand what's been happening on our college campuses, but I'm here to tell you, you have no idea. Seemingly overnight, massive protests nationwide. Nearly 80 encampments sprouted up on university lawns. Masked demonstrators with the same tents, the same signs, the same equipment, but different campuses, different states, different students. This is anything but a coincidence. It's all calculated, and by the way, it's well-funded with the intent to push a very dark agenda. Now, you've all seen the violence that erupted, the chaos that ensued for weeks, but we wanted to know if the protesters even knew what they were fighting for. Take a look.
Even if you don't believe that violence is a direct way to cause change, we are constantly being met with violence. They're gonna make us take stupid classes like Economics 101. We experience violence when we're forced to work, when we're sick.
Do you have any particular demands for UCLA?
Stop ending partnerships with businesses and companies that support the Israeli government.
Do you think the UCLA should discontinue its partnerships with China or Russia or Saudi Arabia?
I don't know. No comment.
What do you think about the sentence, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free?
I think that's good. Yeah, I think, yeah.
For some reason, no one from your guys' team will let you guys speak.
I honestly don't know all of what NYU's doing.
Is there something that NYU's doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they're... Do you know what NYU's doing?
About what?
About Israel. Why are we protesting here at NYU?
I wish I was more educated.
You probably know I've visited the UCLA campus and tried to talk to the encampment organizers, but they wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't talk to me. So I spoke to the students most impacted, the Jewish students. With all that conflict playing out here in America, I also took a trip to Israel and sat down with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We've traveled the distance and dug through the data, and what we found, I have to tell you, is gravely disturbing. Students are being indoctrinated and manipulated by big money billionaires, radical extremist groups, and Islamic fundamentalists right here in America, and they have direct ties to Hamas. It's a growing hate movement, not only against Jews in the state of Israel, but against America, our culture, our principles, and way of life. Now, these protests are evidence of a new domestic terror threat. My first guest, Jonathan Schanzer, was a terrorism finance analyst for the Treasury Department and is now the Senior Research Vice President at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Now, when I said you have no idea how deep and wide this goes, you're about to learn, and it is nothing short of shocking.
What we're seeing right now on college campuses is not organic. It's not spontaneous. This appears to be a well-orchestrated series of events backed by people that have a troubling history of support for Hamas in this country. These are the people that we are now seeing on college campuses. These are not students. We can show you that there are leaders of AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, who are on campus in the last few weeks, driving the chaos on campus. One person that we've seen pop up repeatedly is the executive director of American Muslims for Palestine. His name is Osama Abu Ershad. He appears on that website. They are endorsing something that he wrote. He previously worked for Islamic Association for Palestine that was sued in federal court. It was found guilty of financing and supporting Hamas, and it was eventually dismantled. Abu Ershad has been on the campus of GW as well as Columbia. You hear people calling for the destruction of Israel. You hear people calling for the destruction of the United States, for revolution here in the United States. You hear them calling for an intifada, a violent uprising in both Israel and in America. These are the sorts of things that we hear all the time from Hamas, and the similarities are striking and actually somewhat chilling.
Jonathan, thank you for being here. You've really dug in to who's behind all of this. These are not organic student protests just popping up around the country. Fair statement?
Fair statement. The crazy thing is that in 2016, we were looking at what was known as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that we saw starting to sprout up on college campuses. And I was able to identify that there was an organization, it's called American Muslims for Palestine. These are people that used to work for charities that were shut down in the United States for funding Hamas. So those same people went on to create the movement that we're looking at today.
Some of these groups have actually been here and putting down roots since the 90s.
Oh, yeah, correct. The first one was actually based in Texas, in Richardson, Texas. Yeah. It was called the Holy Land Foundation. They were founded in 1988, and they were shut down by the FBI in 2001. And they had sent $12 million to Hamas. And then as soon as they were shut down, another organization was created in Toledo, Ohio, and that was called Kind Hearts.
These people were investigated, arrested, indicted, and taken to trial in federal court.
Correct.
Some of these players, they're currently doing time 65 years. What was the actual charge? It sounds like treason.
It was terror finance.
Now, my boys played basketball in Richardson. I mean, this is just a regular suburban community here in Dallas-Fort Worth. And right in the middle of it is a terror financing organization.
Correct. And I think it took a lot of people by surprise.
So that means we have these people in the United States on our soil here putting out this kind of hate message rhetoric, financing these terror groups. And part of the financing is they go around to colleges and stir the pot, get this going. How do they do that?
Correct. There are a handful of people that are associated with these previous networks. They were junior people back then. Today, they're 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're out there on campus, and they're holding the mic, and they're leading the chants, and they're giving direction to these students. And we can spot them now at GW, at Penn, San Diego State University, Berkeley, Wisconsin. And these are not students. These people have no business being on campus.
And how'd they get in the country?
Oh, these are naturalized U.S. citizens.
Great. Yeah. These people are coming in chanting death to America and death to Israel and death to Jews. Now, coming up, who is funding all of these college protests? Because you know the term famous during Watergate, if you're old enough to remember that, follow the money? Well, we're going to reveal a vast network with ties to Hamas.
When I think about the USA, it should burn. Death to America. I'm not for peace, I'm for violence.
Why is everybody's tent the same? Was there a fire sale on those tents? There's some organizing going on.
Well, it's obvious that someone is funding them. They were well prepared. These protests began on October 8th. It's very difficult to believe that the students could have produced all of the signs and the flags and all the things that they had the day after Hamas brutally attacked Israelis.
Well, that clip, as seen on cable news network News Nation, spotlights tonight's topic, campus chaos erupting across the country, and that the fact that it is not a coincidence. Jonathan is a former Treasury Department terror finance analyst, and he now heads research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Now, I don't want to blow terms by people assuming they know what they mean. We say intifada. What does that mean?
It's an armed uprising. We've seen two of them in Israel, one in 1988 and then another one in 2000. Very bloody affairs.
And their objective is?
To overthrow and bring down the state of Israel.
They talk about worldwide intifada. What is their goal?
They're talking about revolution. They're talking about upending the American-led world order. When they're calling it on the streets of the United States and they're calling for it on the streets of New York, yeah, I think that's the implication.
Yeah. Now, I've had guests on that say they're pro-Palestinian. They've never been, but they talk about what Hamas did on October 7th as resistance. They talk about Israel as colonialist. They just kind of overlook what they did. And I've said that I think these colleges are not teaching critical thinking to these students so they can step back and say, no, wait a minute, does this even make common sense here? I've seen these banners, gay for Gaza, and I thought, you wouldn't get 10 feet across the border before they gathered them up and threw them off a building.
Correct. I mean, I don't think people realize that Hamas is really, kind of like the Taliban in Afghanistan. The rules that they have instilled inside Gaza are draconian Islamist laws where gays can be beaten and hanged. Either you follow Hamas rule or you pay a price. And I think that's lost on our students right now who are out there, I think purportedly in the name of a liberal cause. And I think they're deeply misguided. I think they have been indoctrinated, and it's quite scary to see.
One of the things that really hit home to me when I was in Israel, talking to victims in these various kibbutz, which are these communal living areas, is I talked to the members there that were saying they were in their safe rooms holding the door shut while the Hamas terrorists were on the other side of the door firing bullets through the door. And one of the mothers was in there with her children and husband so long that one of the babies was getting so dehydrated and crying that they had to pee into a sippy cup and tell the baby it was a different kind of juice. So the baby could drink it. The baby took a few sips and said, I think I want a different kind of juice.
I'll bet.
So let's talk about follow the money. And this is a graphic we put together. And what we've got is big donors, George Soros, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and others. And then this goes down to the Tides Network and Westpac. And these are promoters of radical left causes.
Well, Tides, people talk about this as a dark money channel, and it appears to be a way of circumventing direct investment into some of these radical organizations. So it's a way of pooling some of those funds and then supporting some of the causes that are further down in this graphic that you've just put up.
And let me say, people on both ends of the continuum, left, right, politically, culturally, fund groups. They do. And I'm not saying these are the only people that do it, but they're not just supporting charities or causes, they're supporting anti-American, death to America, death to Jews.
Well, when you look at the money flows over the last number of years, it's conceivable. You want to try to give them the benefit of the doubt. They probably thought they were only supporting anti-Israel boycotters, divestment, the whole movement lower down on the food chain. And I think right now, some of them may be regretting their decision to put money through those channels. But others may have known exactly what they were doing and invested in the kind of chaos that we're seeing on campus right now.
So we have AMP, we have Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Voice for Peace. They have these wonderful, uplifting names. And then this goes down to students that Hamas actually refers to as useful idiots.
And they are, because I think most of these students have no idea what Hamas is. But even before October 7th, this is an organization that has blood on its hands for decades. And it's amazing that you see our students right now on college campus cheering on Hamas. We're living in the upside down here.
I talked to some of these pro-Palestinian students from University of Michigan, and I asked, so river to the sea, this chant. And when I sat with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I said, what do you say to these student organizations that are chanting this, and they say, oh, well, that's just a goal of wanting to overcome the apartheid state. It's not wiping anybody out. And he said, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's ludicrous. I was up in a helicopter on 2 different days over Jerusalem, and you can see the river, and you can see the sea. And they're wanting to wipe out everything between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They're wanting to wipe out every Jew that lives between there and there. Kill them all.
Yeah, it's annihilationist rhetoric, talking about wiping out a country of 10 million people. And by the way, when you talk about apartheid, that's it's the exact wrong word to use. But Israel, this is a country that integrates its Arab and Muslim citizens. They can be Supreme Court justices and doctors and parliamentarians. So the way that they view Israel is deeply sick and twisted. And by the way they look at America now, I think reflects the same.
Well, you're right. The balcony I was sitting on with the prime minister, we're looking down on East Jerusalem, where Arabs and Jews are living together, and they say apartheid. All right, coming up, a man who says America should revoke the visas of foreign students who endorse terrorism. Well, there's a novel thought. Yeah, you would think that would be pretty commonsensical, but no. We're going to add him to this conversation next. I want to add to our discussion Arizona Republican congressional candidate Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's also the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and says America's sickness requires a dose of religious reform and collective patriotism.
I'm a Republican running for Congress in Arizona's 4th district and the son of Syrian immigrants who not only came to America legally, but raised me to love this country. As a doctor in primary care, I treat diseases, not just symptoms. And these demonstrations, as they're called, encampments, and the radical language coming from these radicalized students are a symptom of a much deeper condition that we need to treat, which is radical Islam is an ideology that's incompatible with Western liberal democracy. And this is why I'm working on Islamic reform. So I would say that what we need to do, and I would remind every American that don't just look at the surface. Deeper within is a cancer. And the cancer is a university system that not just is woke, which is also a symptom, but has been funded by foreign nations that want to destroy us. Many Americans are finally waking up to the threat, wondering how it is that students who can't identify Palestine or Gaza or Israel on a map all of a sudden seem to care about what's happening there. Our country is at stake.
Let me ask you this just right off the bat. Why you reckon they're not out there putting up an encampment about all the death in the Congo, about North Korea starving the entire population, about what's happening in Syria? Why this one?
I think that question ultimately, Dr. Phil, exposes the hypocrisy and the moral vacancy of their entire movement. By not condemning Hamas, they actually argue that Muslims have no moral agency. And if they really wanted freedom, they would chant death to Hamas. They want to demonize the West. There's this red-green axis across the world. And this is the synergy of the Iran theocratic movement, Iranians and Muslim Brotherhood, with the China, Russia, Venezuelas of the world, who in the UN have worked together for generations. The Islamic part of that red-green axis has been basically radicalizing our community through the Al Jazeeras, through the medias of their world, and in the United States. So that's how American citizens are radicalized. Sadly, they're not watching our media. They're watching Al Jazeera, Press TV in Iran, and Syrian television.
I spent a lot of my career working with juries and found out really quick that people decide things based on what they see and hear, not on what they don't see and hear. They get pounded day after day after day after day with this message, and that shapes them. And with these terror groups, they start in grade school. They start teaching these children hatred. They start training them to kill Jews. I went to the site of the Nova Music Festival and talked to people that were there. I talked to a first responder, and the things that he saw, there's no moral equivalent to that. They've been over-reporting the deaths, with Israel defending itself and trying to eliminate Hamas. You don't see children ever lose their lives in war, but collateral damage from an act of war versus coming in and killing infants in their cribs intentionally, there's no moral equivalency there.
This is why we need to be unapologetic than that we have the most moral fighting forces in the world, be it the American military, which I served in for 11 years. The best thing the world can do for Muslims in Gaza is defeat and decimate Hamas, which is exactly what Israel and the IDF is doing.
Yeah, in talking to the Prime Minister, he is undeterred. There's no question he is going to eliminate Hamas. But he's not going to stop until he does. What do you mean when you say that some of these insurgents should self-deport?
It's a privilege to come to this country. If you're here, it's a privilege. If you're supporting terror groups, you should be deported. And if you don't like it here, then self-deport and leave. We should make the climate such that it is uncomfortable to stay here.
Coming up, a journalist is going to join us who says Antifa's tactics are the same ones employed by pro-Palestinian groups. You'll explain what he means by that next.
Just a thought experiment here. Just imagine that there was a group of students engaging in violence, engaging in intimidation, destruction of property, and chanting white nationalist slogans, being organized by people formerly associated with David Duke. Do you think for a minute that these campus groups would be allowed to function the next day? The answer is so clearly no, and yet for some reason, our universities, our state governments, and our federal government seem to be willing to allow this insanity to continue on American college campuses.
The level of organization that we're seeing in both of these campuses here.
Let them go! Let them go! Police! You're under arrest! We are being peaceful! You are being violent!
Leaflets on how to protest, leaflets on how to commit civil disobedience, leaflets on what to do when you get arrested. I took a picture of this. Lessons on taking over a school. Can you believe that? At NYU. Tell me that somebody's not radicalizing our students. What NYU student would do something like this? 1, out of the quad. 2, if you build, they will come. 4, listen to the organizers. 5, be prepared. 6, read the pamphlets. Lessons on how to take over a school. Come on, folks. There's somebody behind this.
My next guest, Andy No, is an independent journalist best known for reporting, documenting, and exposing Antifa. He says there are commonalities in tactics, propaganda, and lawfare across several societal movements within the past decade.
This Gaza uprising, it doesn't just stand on its own. It's built on top of the BLM Antifa riots from 4 years ago. Before that, it builds on top of the Occupy movement. I am a New York Times best-selling journalist. My book, Unmasked, it explored the riots that occurred after George Floyd died. Reporting on the far left is really dangerous because there's so few of us doing it.
I'm just trying to be a journalist.
And in 2019, I was beaten by a mob severely, and I was hospitalized with a brain hemorrhage. A lot of the militants hate Israel because they view Israel as a colonial settler project of the United States. The common enemy they see is our country and people like you and I who would dare to stand up to their violent extremist agenda.
Well, Andy, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
This has gotten really personal with you. Antifa has actually tried to kill you on 2 different occasions. What are you saying is so threatening to them?
So I try through my journalism to inform the public about the threat of violent far-left extremism in the United States. We know very much about the violent far-right, but when it comes to the other side, there's actually a vacuum that exists. So what I did as an independent journalist was to go out with my mobile camera to record what was happening at some of these so-called direct actions and protests, which were branded around things that sounded really wonderful. Social justice, racial justice, Black Lives Matter. But the people behind it were actually espousing an ideology of violent revolution, a destruction of America, destruction of the rule of law. In 2020, they exploited the death of George Floyd to carry out acts of violence across the United States. This wasn't to the benefit of any Black communities. Instead, what we saw were Black businesses, homes, neighborhoods torched to the ground. 4 years later, many of these same strategies and tactics are now being used again at some of these university encampments.
Y'all agree there's very similar tactics, right?
Absolutely. It looks like it's coordinated from the outside.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that all four of us here on stage agree with the protections offered under the First Amendment?
Yes.
People have the right to say what they want to say, so long as it's within the bounds of the First Amendment. You can't incite others to violence. You can't lie. And these groups on campus that are being agitated and led by outsiders are doing exactly that. I was on the UCLA campus when they took down that encampment and interviewed Jewish students getting encircled on campus by these pro-Palestinian students. They would link arms and make circles around. They'd block them where they couldn't go to their classes. They were shoving them, pushing them, assaulting them, tearing their books away from them, and putting up all these banners, death to Jews, drawing stars of David on the ground, stomp here to kill a Jew, just all of these things that are intimidation. And administration is doing nothing about it, or very little about it, until finally they get kind of shamed into it. And my problem is these administrators and faculty members, some of them are right in there with them, in the encampments and the demonstrations with them, but they're not teaching critical thinking. They're not teaching these kids to say, wait a minute, where are you from? I don't know you, and how does this make sense? Let's unpack this and see what it is you're asking me to support. Why is that not being taught?
Because there's been institutional capture of American universities. This has been a long-time project of the far left. Many of the radical revolutionary terrorists of the 60s and 70s, after they were convicted and spent time in prison for their organized crimes, went on to become academics and continue to be in academia.
Elika is an Iranian American who has been watching these protests unfold and believes it is a downstream effect of a culture of shame on American youth. Take a look.
Nobody is more gaslit, silenced, and abused than Middle Eastern people sharing the truth that we know, okay, in our bones, about religious extremism, radicalism, fundamentalism. When we were screaming that they were killing Iranian women for not wearing a hijab, where were you? When they were lynching Iranian men from cranes for protesting, where were you? When we were explaining that this is a terrorist occupying force, where were you? If you had listened to us for the past 2 years, much less the past 45 years, you'd know that Iranians don't want war with Israel. We want peace with Israel. Let's talk about how white guilt or Western guilt has now become complicit in the murder of Middle Eastern people. The pro-Palestine movement does attract many anti-Semites, neo-Nazis, Hamas supporters. It allows them to wear the mask of being social justice advocates when in reality they don't care about social justice.
Well, Elika, thank you for being here. Is there reason to be concerned?
Yes. It's very interesting to now have this moment to kind of express what has been ignored from the Iranian community for the past 45 years, because what we have been screaming is that they are infiltrating us here. We proved they were infiltrating the White House, the Pentagon, Washington, and it spread out as a network into academia, which was heavily, heavily funded by jihadist groups, and we all should be terrified.
Well, I've written a book called We've Got Issues.
You do.
How to Stand Strong for the Soul and Sanity of America. And in it, I talk about a document that was intercepted from the Soviets in the 60s that talked about how to undermine American society. And it describes exactly what you were just saying. And at the end of the document, it says, but they're doing it for us.
Oh.
So we're okay.
The puppets.
They've been infiltrated, there's self-hatred. And you say a photo of white American students at UT Austin doing this Namos prayer, that was too much for you.
That was too much for me. We have to kind of look at the preface before we get to this picture, which is that we've had a build-up over the last couple of years with this kind of ideology of shame for having any type of whatever's considered to be privilege. And so what this kind of radical leftist extremism teaches is that you should be ashamed of having any form of privilege. Everything that's in the oppressed category is good and can do no wrong, and everything in the oppressor class is evil and must be destroyed. We're witnessing people seeking to adopt the identity of oppression by appropriating Middle Eastern dress. And the very, very, very important point about why this is so dangerous is because native Muslims in these countries understand the line between their practice and extremism. They know how to draw those lines. But when you're appropriating this from afar, you're taking it wholesale. You're saying nothing about any of this can be wrong.
And that's the ultimate form of bigotry, right? Which is why, Dr. Phil, they live in identity politics, because the real diversity, the 80% of America that's in the middle, believes in ideological diversity, not skin-deep diversity, which is ethnic, tribal politics.
So if they're looting stores, burning down neighborhoods, all they have to do is throw the oppressed card up on the table, and that becomes okay.
Yeah, but I will add to that. I think there is a different element of the protest that we're seeing now. I think what cannot be ignored is that there is an internal influence in these movements. And as you said, everyone who tries to speak on this is completely gaslit. You're making it up. It's 100% peaceful protest. You cannot tell us, as we've seen the destruction of this in our own countries, that this isn't happening. We know it's happening. And you would not tell any other group in this country that was witnessing an existential threat to their lives, any form of terrorism within this country, oh, it's okay, it's just a few hundred people that are celebrating, Nazis, KKK. No, absolutely you wouldn't do that. So what gives you the right to tell us that we should shut up when it's an existential threat to us in the Middle East, to Muslims, Jews, Christians?
Well, I agree. I've talked to so many of, particularly some Jewish young women who say they have gone with their friends during Me Too and different things like that. And then when it came around, time for them to be supported, they couldn't find those people with both hands because it had happened to a Jew. You have this, what I call tyranny of the fringe, on both ends of the continuum that are the loudest and the most shrill that are controlling the narrative. And the 70% of America in the middle need to speak up.
Oh, absolutely.
They need to speak up.
Absolutely.
And we're headed towards a tipping point. The military academies are not immune. Our families are not immune. School systems, educational systems, obviously. Government is not immune. To fight that, we have to recreate a movement of the soul of America, as your book says, of the soul of America, what our values are, to save the West. The West is at stake.
I think the biggest mistake we could make is this is a war going on halfway around the world, got nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with every one of us. And we need to figure that out before it is painfully brought into focus. Thanks so much to all my guests tonight. My final thoughts when we come back. Well, tonight we've not been talking about normal campus protests, but instead how college campuses have been hijacked as terrorist propaganda venues with students Hamas refer to as useful idiots, many recruited by thinly disguised affiliate organizations, paid non-student organizers with a decidedly anti-Israeli, anti-American, and anti-Semitic agenda set on destroying America, Israel, and all Western democracies in their quest for authoritarian power have become deeply embedded on so many college campuses. bottom line, they are the enemy, and they are here inside our borders on American soil. We have all watched college students over the years protesting against this and that, just different things. Some causes seemingly more worthy than others. This time, it is different. The purpose now is from the outside to create chaos, radicalize young Americans in favor of our sworn enemies, and to destroy this country. I give students some benefit of the doubt because I at least hope they know not what they do. Perhaps after watching this show, they will at least consider they are consorting with the enemy. As for the rest of us, maybe we haven't sounded the alarm because we just did not know that terrorist organizations were selling these students and faculty a bill of goods, such as the murderous attacks of 10/7 were simply justifiable resistance, or, believe it or not, that it didn't happen at all. The agitators count on the fact that young people aren't motivated to do the factual research, to dig in and discover. But at Dr. Phil Primetime and Merritt Street Media, we do have the resources and the motivation to discover the facts that make sounding the alarm an imperative. And after tonight, I hope you know, and I invite you to fact-check everything you have seen and heard. Some of these organizers have been identified, tried, and convicted of providing support to Hamas and other enemies, serving sentences up to 65 years in prison. In this country, we have been experiencing a social tsunami. Everybody is a YouTube or Instagram genius, right? The phone knows everything. And they have been pontificating, now protesting about how to run the world while sipping their latte at Starbucks. The internet breathes life into almost any issue. By the 2016 election, the tsunami was picking up speed. Everybody hated somebody, and almost everybody was fed up with something. Reasonable people can disagree about such things, and open debate is the oxygen a free society breathes. But the right to advocate your competing position does not license you to violate the rights of others, to destroy property, to block entrances to school buildings, especially in some distorted support of atrocities that occurred on October 7th in Israel. Freedom of speech does not include resorting to supporting terrorists who committed the unthinkable atrocities on that day. And as we speak, continue to do so to the hostages they so savagely drug from their homes and the safety of their homeland, all while chanting death to America. When that is done, any right to be considered or dealt with as reasonable is forfeited, and it doesn't depend on context. Open and free civil debate is one thing, burning babies alive in their cribs is quite another. There are rules of decency and humanity that may not be crossed, and Hamas crossed that line. Those who support them, including the college protests, cannot expect to successfully hide behind the First Amendment. If I, by following the money, have helped you see the difference between free and open debate and what we now are seeing on college campuses, I feel I have done at least part of my job as an American. People have the right to fund causes we disagree with, even abhor. I do not call on you to stand up for America against those with whom we may disagree, but tonight I do call on you to stand up against Hamas, its various tentacles, and all that it stands for, all that it does, and against those who support it, including those useful idiots on college campuses. It's your decision to make. The choice is yours, but remember this: you cannot unknow what you learned here tonight. You must now decide who you stand behind and who you will stand up against. I call on you tonight to make the right choice in that regard, and make no mistake, not choosing is a choice. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night.